Hey guys, tonight we travel north to icy coastlines, to hearth-lit wooden halls, to a time when winter lasted half the year and central heating was just sitting closer to the fire. Welcome to the Viking world. You're in Norway, or maybe Iceland, or maybe some unnamed coastal outpost perched where the waves bite and the winds howl. The snow has settled thick on the roof. The longboats hauled ashore, and for the next few months, you and your clan are very much not going anywhere. The sea, which fed you for much of the year, is now half frozen and entirely uncooperative. The fishing nets are coiled and stiff with frost, and the birds who once circled above have migrated south with much better vacation plans than yours. Inside, the longhouse smells of wood smoke, sweat, and something vaguely pickled. The fire crackles in the central hearth, sending occasional sparks into the dark beams above. Cloaks are hung to dry, and the dogs curl close to your feet. You'd think, given all the chill and gloom, that mealtimes would be a highlight. And, well, they are, but not necessarily in the way you'd hope. You probably won't survive this, not because of battle or disease or dragons, but because dinner tonight is 3-month-old fish jerky and you forgot to chew slowly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. This sleepy saga always has room for one more at the fire. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the longhouse as the sun disappears behind gray clouds that have hung there all day. The first thing you notice, besides the fact that your toes may never regain feeling, is the sound. It's quieter than usual. No distant clang of blacksmithing. No kids shouting about stolen wooden toys. No laughter. Just the hush of breath. The low groan of wind squeezing between the timbers, and someone coughing over in the sleeping corner. Winter in the Viking world is not festive. It's not all mead halls and horn blowing. It's mostly cold and dark, so very dark. In some places, the sun doesn't fully rise for weeks. Your circadian rhythm has long since given up and is now just blinking slowly in confusion. The longhouse becomes your world. One room, really a big one, sure, but still, just one, lined with benches and furs, a hearth smoldering down the middle, and the constant presence of about 15 people too close for comfort. But back to food. You glance at the woven baskets and carved wooden bins pushed to the corners. Supplies are inventoried constantly, because there's no popping out for more. What you have now must last until spring, unless you feel like chewing on leather straps by late February. Which, honestly, some do. And the catch. What's left isn't all that exciting. Remember the fish you caught in the fall, long-dried, hard as planks? That stockfish and unsalted, air-dried whitefish that's so tough it needs to be beaten with a hammer before you can cook it. No joke, a literal hammer. Picture yourself sitting beside a warrior who once split a man in half with an axe, and now he's tapping politely on cod to tenderize dinner. Some of the stockfish will be boiled, some toasted directly on coals, and some, if you're lucky, will get dunked in sour whey for a bit of added tang. Emphasis on bit. The whey is old too. Everything is old. Welcome to Viking winter cuisine. You check the smokehouse out back. A few strips of lamb, shriveled and dark, hang like forgotten laundry. Someone tried to pickle herring in a barrel last August, and the result, well, let's say even the dog avoids it now. There's goat's milk cheese tucked into ash-lined pots, hardened into something between food and furniture. It crumbles dry in your mouth like history itself. Still, it has protein, which is more than you can say for the pale handful of seaweed someone laid out on a flat stone to dry and then forgot about until yesterday. Even the goats themselves aren't pleased. They don't like the snow. They hate the wind. And honestly, they seem vaguely offended you haven't figured out central heating yet. They stare at you from the corner of the stable, their breath fogging, their attitude unimpressed. Still, the elders say this is how it's always been. You wait, you ration, you get creative. You don't complain too loudly unless you want a lecture involving Odin, frost giants, and how real Vikings didn't whine. Historians still argue whether winter hunger truly bonded Viking families or just made them extra irritable. There's no definitive answer, but one thing's clear. If you wanted a culinary adventure, you came to the wrong fjord. Still, there's a strange comfort to it all. The sameness, the rituals, the way someone always offers you the same gruel with the same half-smile, as if this time it'll taste different. Spoiler, it won't. But you're warm now. The wind is outside. The fire is steady, and that old dried fish, once you chew it 47 times, it's not the worst thing in the world. The smoke curls up from the central hearth and stings your eyes just a little. It always does, even though you've sat in this spot every winter night since the first frost. You shift your fur cloak, glance across the hall, and spot your clan's prized possessions hanging from the rafters. No, not swords or gold, but food, the real treasure. Strings of stockfish sway gently in the draft. Their desiccated forms are tough as driftwood and smell faintly of ocean and despair. They've been drying for months now, and while they look like they'd shatter your molars, they're actually prized for their durability and, well, they exist. That's half the culinary battle in Viking winter. Tucked near the beams are bundles of dried seaweed kelp, mostly gathered during the last low tide of autumn. Someone had the bright idea of flavoring stew with it once, and now it's a regular ingredient. It's salty, slightly chewy, and gives everything a suspiciously green tint. Still, it beats licking the saltstone in desperation. Again, next to the seaweed hang dried sausages made from, you're not sure, some kind of meat, likely goat, possibly squirrel. No one really remembers what went into that batch, and the cook has become suspiciously vague when asked. Down below, in one of the darker corners, lies the goat. The goat has a name. You don't use it. It feels risky to get emotionally attached to anything that may soon become stew, but for now, she's still around, grumpy, stomping at frozen straw, and occasionally plotting escape. Vikings didn't keep vast herds through the winter. Animals take up space, food, and warmth. 3 things in very short supply. Only the hardiest beasts remained. A few sheep for wool, the goat for milk sometimes, and the occasional half-wild cow that glares at everyone with the weary disdain of a creature fully aware it lives inside a smoke-filled log cabin. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly domesticated their goats, or if the goats merely tolerated the arrangement as long as the hay held out. One saga does mention a goat kicking a chieftain into a snowdrift, though it's hard to say if that's literal or poetic justice. Meanwhile, in a back storage pit, essentially a glorified hole with a wooden lid, you'll find preserved milk. That's right, preserved, as in intentionally left to curdle, thicken, ferment, and sour into something called skyr. Skyr's been described as yogurt, but that's far too kind. Imagine a cross between cheese and very disappointed cream. It's tangy, nutritious, and so dense you could probably spackle a boat hull with it. Back in the main hall, someone is scraping the black crust off a loaf of barley bread. It was baked last week, or maybe the week before. Time blurs in winter. The bread is hard, square, and could survive being dropped from a fortress wall, which is handy because it doubles as a blunt weapon during sibling disputes. Despite the chill, there's a rhythm to these food rituals. You collect the goat's milk when she's feeling generous, strain it through a cloth, and hide it in a clay pot near the fire. In a day or two, it becomes tangy enough to wake the dead and sour enough to repel the living. But you eat it anyway. You kneel beside the pit where the onions are kept. A few are sprouting. One has gone mushy. You poke it, regret it, move on. It's not all gloom, though occasionally someone brings out the honey. A small clay jar hidden in the chieftain's private stash, golden, thick, and wildly out of place. The sweetness tastes like a lost summer. You dip a finger, close your eyes, let it linger. Jokingly, someone once said, if the gods wanted us to enjoy winter, they'd have sent fruit. That person was promptly told to go chew on their own boots, which they nearly did. You sit back and look around the longhouse. Everyone's doing something with food, poking it, boiling it, gnawing on it, or pretending it tastes better than it does. The smell in the air is a mix of smoke, old meat, and cabbage that gave up weeks ago. And yet, there's warmth in this place. Real warmth, not just from the fire, but from the shared struggle of making dried goat jerky taste like dinner, or from the communal laughter when someone bites into a biscuit so stale it cracks in half like a roof tile. There's a quiet pride in knowing that you, like your ancestors, will make it through another season of salted, smoked, and shriveled everything. You'll survive on things hung from beams, buried in dirt, or invented in desperation. And you'll never look at a goat the same way again. The next morning, though, morning is generous. Since the sun barely flickers above the horizon, you wake to the sound of scraping, not sword sharpening, spoon scraping. Someone is already working on the day's breakfast, and it's gruel. Again, you stretch under your wool blanket, take a deep breath, and try not to inhale too much smoke. The hearth smolders with last night's coals, and there's a large iron pot swinging lazily above it. Inside, barley gruel, possibly oat, possibly some unidentifiable grain swept from the floor. Whatever it is, it's been boiled for hours and smells faintly of wet bark. Welcome to the heart of Viking winter cuisine: porridge, gruel, and more porridge. Thick, beige, and suspiciously lumpy. If you're lucky, it's got a few slivers of dried apple. If you're not, it has boiled fish bits that no one really asked for. There's no breakfast menu, no cinnamon sugar, no toasted almonds. This isn't a spa. It's survival with a ladle. The gruel, or grotter, was a staple not just because it was filling, but because it was forgiving. You could throw in almost anything. Dried herbs, bits of bone broth, shavings of dried turnip, or if you're particularly daring, the remains of last night's stew. The result, a new flavor profile known as tolerable. You stir your bowl with a carved wooden spoon. It's warm, which is nice. It doesn't taste like much, which is expected, and it sticks to your ribs, which is the point. You glance across the hearth and catch the eye of Bjorn, who's already 3 bites in and chewing like he's mad at it. Bit less chewy than yesterday, he says, possibly joking, possibly not. Hard to tell with Bjorn. The kids complain. Of course, kids always do. One glares into his bowl like it personally insulted him. Another tries to trade his for a dried beet, which is not much of an upgrade. Historians still argue whether Viking children had distinct food allowances or just ate whatever they could steal when the adults looked away. Given the stealthy way that little one is pocketing a biscuit, we lean toward the latter. But even among the grumbling, there's a rhythm. Everyone knows the deal. Food isn't for joy, it's for energy, for warmth, for getting through another long, gray day. Still, the clan does try to mix things up. Once a week, someone grinds barley extra fine to make a kind of thin pancake on the flat stone by the fire. It's not quite crispy. It's not quite soft. It's present. That's enough. Some mornings, you eat in silence. Other mornings, the room hums with sleepy conversation. Someone mumbling about a dream of green fields. Someone else grumbling about how the goat knocked over the water pail again. There's always a bit of communal venting. Keeps the spirits from freezing over. The longhouse creaks overhead. Snow has built up on the thatched roof, and you're vaguely aware that if it collapses, it will do so directly onto the stew pot. You add a mental note to rotate your sleeping spot slightly farther from ground zero. As the meal winds down, someone fetches a round of ale. Not the fresh, bubbly kind. This is flat, dark, and a little sour. All in winter is brewed weak, often with foraged herbs, and stored in barrels that have definitely seen better centuries. But it's warm and comforting in its own fermented way. And then, of course, there's the bread. Not everyday flour is precious, but occasionally hard loaves appear, baked with barley, rye, and sometimes even crushed tree bark. That last part isn't a joke. Vikings sometimes padded out their flour with finely ground pine bark during famine years. Adds character. You take a bite. It crunches like a gravel path. Bjorn offers you some skyer to soften it. You decline. You'd rather keep your molars intact. Outside, the wind howls against the walls. The sky is a milky blur, the kind of cold that makes your eyes water instantly. But inside the longhouse, bellies are full enough. The gruel did its job, and so did the people who stirred it, scraped it, served it, and swallowed it. And like the longhouse itself, the food holds. Midday settles in like a lazy shadow. There's no dramatic shift in light, just a slightly less oppressive gray bleeding through the oiled hide that covers the window slits. You don't really notice the time. You notice the hunger. Again, that means it's time for lunch, or more accurately, it's time to poke around the cold storage corners and hope something edible hasn't turned into a science experiment. You shuffle to the food pit, the underground cache dug out in the fall, lined with stones and packed tight with hay and snow. It smells like possibility, also like slightly sour cabbage. You pull back the cloth, and there it is, a cracked ceramic jar filled with fermented turnips. Not pickled, fermented. There's a difference. One is controlled. The other is Viking style. The turnips are soft, sharp-smelling, and definitely alive in the microbial sense. You take a piece, bite cautiously, and try not to wince. It stings your tongue, makes your nose twitch, but once it settles, not terrible. You grab a second. This is lunch now. Next to the turnips sits a wooden cask. Inside, fermented shark, or what once was a shark. The Icelanders call it hearty, and even they admit it's an acquired taste. Vikings didn't have refrigerators, so they had chemistry, the kind that made food last longer and your stomach question your decisions. Historians still argue whether hearty was a regular Viking dish or a last resort dare. Some sources suggest it was eaten ceremonially. Others insist it was simply a method of making otherwise toxic meat safe well. Safe in air quotes. You pass on the shark today. You're not that brave. Instead, you scoop out some sour milk curdled ages ago and now thick as paste. It's called surmjölk, and it's got a vinegary kick that clears your sinuses right up. The old-timers swear by it. A few people sip from a communal bowl of mjödur, a weak honey mead made during the warmer months. By now, it's lost its sweetness and picked up an extra layer of funk, but it's liquid, and that counts for something. You join the others by the fire, bowls in hand, spoons at the ready. Someone's trying to mash a boiled onion into their gruel for flavor. Someone else is bragging about having found a preserved apple in the cold box, small, wrinkled, and heroic. There's talk of a feast coming up. Yule. It's still weeks away, but everyone dreams about it now and then. Roasted meat, flatbread made with real flour, dried berries plumped in water, even a little butter. If the goat cooperates. Until then, it's preservation season. Everything is dried, smoked, brined, or soured. You begin to develop a fondness for shelf life as a concept, and the methods ingenious. Really, fish are strung out on racks in the wind to dry into leathery slivers. Root vegetables are buried in pits lined with straw. Meat is salted until it forgets what moisture is, and when salt runs low, things get smoked over pine, birch, or whatever burns slowest and stinks the least. You remember watching the elders press sheep tallow into animal stomachs last fall. Basically, Viking Tupperware. Fat-packed meat sealed from air and buried under snow. That stuff's still down there, waiting. It might be dinner tomorrow, or next week, or when someone forgets to block the door and the goat eats the bread again. The children have a game. What's that smell? The rules are unclear. The goal seems to be making adults admit what's cooking. Spoiler, it's always the same three things. You glance at the longhouse walls, smoke darkened and streaked with soot. Herbs hang from nails, dried angelica, yarrow, wild onion stalks. They add the illusion of variety. You crush a leaf between your fingers and inhale. It smells vaguely like summer. There's a moment of silence. Everyone's chewing or sipping. A log pops in the fire. Snow sifts off the roof like powder. Someone sighs. Not a sad sigh, just a winter sigh. You take another spoonful of sour milk. It bites back, as usual. But it's food. It's here. It's earned. And somewhere, deep in the buried ice cellar, is a lump of cheese old enough to qualify as an ancestor. That, you think, might just be the final boss of Viking fermentation. The sun, if you can call it that, has begun its descent, even though it barely climbed at all. Twilight in Viking lands lasts hours, turning the snowy world outside into a smudgy watercolor of grays and blue-tinged silence. Inside the longhouse, people shift from midday tasks to the quiet anticipation of something special. Bread, not just any bread, Yule bread. Flat, round, decorated with patterns pressed in by thumb or bone-carved stamp, and seasoned with whatever the household can spare a pinch of crushed juniper, a bit of honey, or even rare dried berries if someone was unusually lucky or sneaky during summer foraging. This isn't a daily treat. You don't waste precious flour on artistry, but as the year turns toward its darkest days, there's a comfort in flour, fire, and dough, and so, once a week or when spirits sag enough to justify it, the dough is mixed. Barley, mostly, sometimes rye. If the trade was good, it's gritty and coarse, flecked with husk and small stones you might accidentally chew if you're not careful. The Vikings didn't bother much with sieving. fiber builds character, or at least dental resilience. Today's batch is being baked directly on a flat, hot stone. There's no oven, just glowing coals and practiced hands. The dough is shaped, pressed flat, and slapped onto the heat like a declaration of minor rebellion against winter. You watch it brown slowly, steam rising in soft curls. The smell nutty, warm, just a touch sweet fills the longhouse and wraps around everyone like a blanket. Even the goat stops clomping around for a moment, intrigued. These breads are firm, dense, not fluffy or flaky or anything that would survive a modern baking show, but they're real. You tear one in half, the crust snaps. The inside is dark and hearty, and if you close your eyes, you can imagine fields and sun and grain swaying in the wind. Someone jokes that it could double as a shield. Someone else pretends to bite it like an apple and feigns broken teeth. Laughter follows real laughter, the kind that bounces off wood beams and keeps the dark a little further away. Historians still argue whether Viking Yule bread was purely practical or spiritual. Was it just calories with style, or a symbolic offering to house spirits and ancestors? Both, probably, in this world. Food and ritual mix, like barley and water. After the bread cools slightly, it's passed around. No plates, just hands, fingers brushing, small nods of thanks. You take your piece and savor it. Not because it's the best thing you've ever tasted, but because it feels like a pause, a shared breath, a bite of memory. A child brings out a pot of rendered animal fat lard, mostly flavored with wild onion or bits of dried meat. A dab of it on the bread turns it into a feast. Rich, salty, smoky. You close your eyes. The world contracts to firelight and warm grain. Outside, the snow thickens. A hush falls. Even the wind seems to settle into a rhythm. Inside, bellies grow quiet. Hands fold, and eyes drift toward the fire. The meal is small. The flavors are few. But no one's hungry now. There's a story told tonight about a Yule bread that once saved a village. The details change depending on who tells it, but it always ends with someone realizing they had enough all along. That even in the darkest days, something warm and simple can be a light. You chew your last bite slowly. The crust is sharp against your teeth, but the inside is soft and oddly sweet, like it borrowed a few sunbeams and hid them deep in the dough. You sit back. The fire crackles. Someone adds more wood. Steam rises from a pot that's still simmering, in case anyone wants more. But no one does. They're full for now. Night tightens its grip around the longhouse, sealing you in with the warmth of fire and the smell of simmering stew. You stretch your legs under the bench, shift your cloak, and let your thoughts drift. Somewhere in the hall, a soft snore begins. Maybe the elder on the far end. Maybe the dog curled by the hearth. Hard to tell. Everyone's a bit rounder, softer, slower this time of year. But not everyone eats equally. As the evening meal begins, a familiar pattern emerges. The chieftain and his close kin get the first ladles from the stew, thickest, meatiest, freshest. Their bowls steam with bits of pork or mutton, dark broth, shimmering with fat. You wait a few turns. Your bowl is still warm, but by the time it reaches you, what was once a luxurious chunk of meat has become a lonely sliver drifting beside a carrot stump, and some herbs you suspect were scraped from the wall. That's winter for you, hierarchical hunger. Among Vikings, food was political. Feasting showed power. Skimping revealed weakness, even in the tight squeeze of a snowbound household. Who got what, when, and how often told you everything about your place in the world. And it wasn't always fair. The meat itself, scarce. Most of the livestock were slaughtered in the fall when feed ran low. The best cuts roasts, ribs, hams were salted, smoked, and reserved for feasts, honored guests, or, let's be honest, the people in charge. What did you get? Broth, bones, maybe a knuckle or two if it was a generous night. Don't get it wrong, bone broth is a miracle in its own right. Rich in minerals, easy on the stomach, and surprisingly filling when thickened with barley or root vegetables. But when the stew pot's been reheated 4 times in 3 days, the flavor starts to whisper instead of shout. Tonight's stew is a mix of cabbage, turnip, maybe a bit of goat if the rumors are true. You dip your spoon. It's hot, salty, serviceable. You chew slowly and imagine something better. Maybe roasted duck, maybe fried eggs, maybe whatever a Roman emperor used to eat when he wasn't starting wars. the elders. They remember the better days, spring lamb, summer berries, fresh milk, thick with cream. They don't talk about it much. But sometimes, in between bites, you catch a wistful look in their eyes. The children, meanwhile, are just happy if their bowl is warm. One's licking his clean already, eyes scanning for leftovers. Another's trying to swap turnips for barley. It's the same game every night, a barter system of boredom. Historians still argue whether Viking food shortages were as dire as some sagas suggest. There's evidence of trade, of strategic animal husbandry, of storage systems that helped stretch supplies. But they also find famine pits, bones of animals slaughtered too early, and even accounts of bark bread and pine flour. So yes, it got rough. You sip the last of your broth. A piece of onion floats lazily near the rim. You fish it out with your spoon and savor the texture, slightly mushy, slightly sweet, slightly over it. Then comes a surprise. Someone pulls out a pouch of salt, actual salt, not fishy, not crusted, not improvised, the real thing. A few grains are sprinkled into the communal pot. You lean forward, curious. Salt in winter is like gold, and no one uses it casually. Turns out, someone's brother returned from a trade post. He brought furs to exchange and came back with salt, dried cherries, and a knife carved with serpent runes. The knife is cool, but it's the salt everyone stares at. You dip a fingertip into the pot, taste, and suddenly the stew is different. The bland broth wakes up. The cabbage sings. The goat, if it was goat, almost smiles. A few minutes later, the pot is empty. The bowls are set aside. The hall grows quieter, not silent, though there's a hum now, a softness, the kind that comes when people have eaten enough. Maybe not well, maybe not lavishly, but enough. You lean back, eyes half closed. The fire pops. Your belly's not full, but it's content. And tomorrow, there might be more bones or less broth. Or, if the goat gets too bold, no milk at all. But tonight, there was meat, sort of, and that's something. Later that evening, someone lifts the lid off the main cauldron again, stirring slowly, more out of habit than hope. A second helping, maybe a warm sip to end the night, or just a curious poke. What's in the stew now? And the answer, truly, is always the same. Whatever didn't rot yet. Today's blend. A murky swirl of odds and ends, bits of turnip skin, rehydrated, dried leeks, and something vaguely fishy that may or may not be from last week's catch. You recognize a piece of barley bread floating lazily near the top, soggy and grayish. It's stew now, that's how it works. There is no recipe. The Viking stew pot is an ever-changing, never-ending vessel of culinary chaos. Things go in, things come out, and somewhere along the way, something like flavor emerges, or at least warmth. You lift your bowl, give it a sniff. It smells okay, not good, not bad, just familiar, a little smoky, a little sour, like memories boiled twice. You take a bite and chew slowly. It's hot, which is a victory in itself. There's a game you play silently. Identify the texture. Crunchy, probably old parsnip. Rubbery, definitely dried fish skin. Slimy, don't ask. Just enjoy the warmth and move on. In the far corner, a woman murmurs, tastes better than last time. Another replies, you say that every night. They both laugh. This is comfort food. If your definition of comfort is something that doesn't fight back too much, and yet it's strangely endearing. The stew pot is always there, always simmering, always ready, even when everything else, weather, livestock, mood is unpredictable. Every now and then, a real surprise emerges. A forgotten bit of dried apple. A coin-sized round of hard cheese that tumbled in unnoticed. Once, someone found a boiled bird's egg that had rolled under the shelf last harvest and somehow survived. That was a good night. Everyone talked about Egg Day for weeks. You scoop up the last bit with a hunk of bread that's more crouton than loaf. Now, it's like chewing a damp stone. But you manage. That's part of the charm. Food that requires effort, concentration, and solid dental work. And yet, nobody complains too much. Complaining takes energy. Also, what else are you going to eat? Someone mutters, at least there's no squirrel tonight. Historians still argue whether Viking stews were a culinary tradition or just a clever way to avoid waste. It was probably both. The cauldron was the original slow cooker. Fill it up. Let it bubble all day. Feed the house as needed. And no one got to be picky. You glance over at the children, now slouched against each other in a pile of cloaks. One of them has a chunk of dried root in their mouth. chewing quietly like a mouse working through a pencil. They don't seem to mind. At the hearth, the pot hisses. A new log is added. The stew shifts in the firelight, thick and dark and endlessly mysterious. A joke starts near the back of the hall. What's in the pot tonight? The answer, as always, yes. You smile, everyone does. Because deep down, even the worst Viking stew is a little like the longhouse itself, mismatched, weathered, and full of odd bits you didn't expect. But it holds together, it nourishes, and, crucially, it's warm, with bowls scraped clean and bellies leaning more toward sufficient than satisfied. The longhouse settles into its quiet evening hum. It's that gentle lull between the final stew and the first snore, a time for stories, soft conversations, and maybe, just maybe, the mysterious appearance of flavor. Because tonight, someone brings out the herb pouch. Now, don't picture a modern spice rack, no saffron, no cinnamon, no imported pink Himalayan salt in handcrafted ceramic bowls. Vikings weren't grinding peppercorns with artisanal flair, but what they did have was surprisingly clever, foraged flavor. The pouch is untied. Inside are dried leaves, twisted roots, seed pods, and a few crushed berries, all collected carefully over the summer. Some are for seasoning, others for medicine, and a few blur the line between the two. You lean in, curious. A pinch of dried wild onion hits the pot with a gentle sizzle. Someone crushes yarrow leaves between their fingers and sprinkles it into a cup of warm mead. Someone else throws in a whole dried juniper berry, purely for the drama of it. Suddenly, dinner smells like something new, or at least like something that wasn't scraped off a boot. The transformation is subtle but real. Even one dried nettle leaf can make a stew taste less like regret and more like intention. Vikings weren't flavorless by choice. They were just working with what the land gave them, and occasionally, what trade routes snuck in wealthier halls or in ports where ships came bearing foreign goods. You might even find exotic herbs, coriander, cumin, or garlic. These were rare, expensive, and treasured, used sparingly. Whispered about, historians still argue whether imported spices were common in Viking kitchens or reserved solely for the elite. The evidence suggests a bit of both. Some finds hint at peppercorns in burial sites. Others reveal herb gardens planted in far-flung settlements. But you've got angelica, dried, sharp, slightly bitter, supposedly good for digestion, possibly used in love potions, definitely tossed into tonight's stew with more optimism than science. There's also sweet gale, a shrub with leaves that add a peppery bitterness to ale and broth. It grows wild near marshy areas and gives the illusion of spice without the price tag. Someone next to you takes a long sniff and murmurs, "Smells almost like midsummer." You nod. That's the goal. Even the goat seems curious. She creeps closer to the hearth, sniffs the air, then walks off unimpressed. Her palate remains tragically underdeveloped. Tonight's best addition is thyme, or what passes for thyme in the Viking world. It was dried carefully in the rafters, bundled and tied with gut string. The woman who gathered it says it helps fight colds. The man next to her says it just makes things taste less like boiled shoe. Both could be right. You help stir the pot slowly, gently releasing the scent. It curls upward, wraps around the rafters, and settles over the group like a spell. Food still tastes like survival, but now survival has a note of warmth, of depth, of intention. The child nearest the fire wrinkles her nose. Why does it smell like leaves? Someone replies, because it is leaves. She shrugs, dunks her bread, and declares it fine. That's as good a review as any Viking cook is likely to get. There's a story told tonight of an old seeress who brewed tea from moss and claimed it let her speak to birds. No one believes it, exactly. But everyone sips a little moss tea anyway, just in case, because food isn't just nourishment. It's story, magic, memory. It's what keeps the dark from creeping too close. And even in this winter world of gruel and goat milk, flavor finds a way in, leaf by leaf, pinch by pinch. And tomorrow, someone promises dried berries, probably lingon, possibly rowan. Either way, your taste buds will throw a party, quietly, respectfully, in full Viking style. Outside, the wind has picked up again. Its long moan pressing against the walls like a slow exhale from the mountains. Inside, the fire burns steady, the air thick with smoke and the smell of pine sap. It's time now for the strange ritual that defines winter more than any stew or stale bread. The daily dance between feasting and fasting. The Viking calendar didn't flow like ours. It moved with the moon, with the harvest, with whatever whims the gods, or more often, the livestock allowed. Some days were for celebration, others were for restraint. Most were for pretending one while doing the other. Tonight is not a feast night. But that hasn't stopped someone from sharpening a knife just a little too enthusiastically. There's a quiet tension in the room. People are sniffing the air, peeking at pots. A few children are bouncing as if sensing something's up. That's because of Yule. It's close now. The midpoint of winter, the mark of the sun's slow return. Officially, it's still days away. Unofficially, it starts as soon as someone finds a reason to sneak a feast. You spot two young men carrying in a bundled carcass a pig, maybe a wild boar caught in a snare. The meat is fresh, too fresh. It breaks the pattern. Everyone notices. The stew is quietly enhanced. The don't ask what's in it rule applies extra tonight. Is this the feast? A preview? A mistake? No one says, but everyone leans in. You sit, spoon in hand, thinking about the Viking approach to food and celebration. Feasts were political, public, ceremonial, and often complicated. Historians still argue whether fasting rituals in Viking society were religious, cultural, or just practical reactions to dwindling supplies. There are records of holy days where meat was forbidden, but also of back doors and loopholes. Meatless stews with hidden chunks, fasting meals consumed behind barrels. In this house, the lines are blurry, the elders nod, pretending it's still a simple broth. But you taste the truth: salt, fat, flavor, even a sliver of actual meat. And so, the quiet feast begins. One child claps softly, another starts humming a winter song. Off-key but sweet. The tension breaks. People pass bread. Spoon seconds, share their warmest cloaks. It's not grand, not a banquet, but it's enough. And in winter, enough feels like luxury. You catch whispers of plans. Yule logs, goat masks, ritual songs sung to scare off bad luck. One man swears he'll drink a full horn of mead. Another swears he'll finally clean his corner of the longhouse. Both are likely lying. But feasting isn't about quantity. It's about timing, contrast, context. You fast until you feast, and you feast until you fast again. And sometimes, when the line blurs, you get a night like this. Warm bowls, full bellies, quiet smiles. A fire that crackles just loud enough to drown the wind. You lean back, breathing deep. The stew still steams faintly. Someone hands you the last crust of bread, not because they're done, but because they remember you gave them an onion 3 nights ago. Food as currency, as memory, as subtle, unspoken gratitude. Outside, the snow keeps falling, but inside, something has shifted. Not just the stew, not just the smell, the mood. And for a moment, you forget it's not even Yule yet. The fire burns low, casting a slow amber glow across fur-covered benches and smoke-darkened beams. You're slouched against a post, bowl empty, body warm, eyelids heavy, but over in the corner, something curious is happening. A small gathering children, elders, and the few night owls of the household are gathered around the oldest man in the longhouse, Askell. His beard is long enough to tuck into his belt, and his back curves like a drawn bow. He doesn't speak often, but when he does, everyone leans in, partly out of respect, partly because he speaks very quietly. He's gnawing, slowly, stubbornly, on a piece of jerky that looks more like a wood chip than meat. You can hear the faint crunch from across the room. Someone offers him a softer bite, some barley mash, a sliver of fish fat, but he waves it off with a hand like an old tree root. Not for me, he grumbles. My teeth remember what meat used to be. You smile. That's the Viking elder spirit. Pride, salt, and denture-defying determination. To be fair, not all teeth in this household are faring much better. You're reminded every day how age, nutrition, and food texture played games with people's mouths long before the invention of soft bread and dental floss. The young children, they still have all their teeth small, white, fast. They tear into bread crusts with alarming enthusiasm and chew dried fish skin like it's a game. For them, winter is long but novel. Everything still feels like a challenge worth taking. The elders, on the other hand, approach every meal like a strategic negotiation. Soft foods are gold, stewed vegetables, boiled grains, mashed beans. Anything that doesn't shatter molars is prized. You offer your bowl to Askell, more broth. He peers into it, considers, and finally nods, so long as it doesn't talk back. Historians still argue whether Viking elders were respected out of genuine admiration or simply feared for their blunt storytelling and iron stomachs. Likely both. Meals were family affairs, but they weren't democratic. Seating arrangements, serving order, and portion sizes often reflected one's role, age, gender, usefulness, and sometimes how loud you snored at night. The youngest kids are fed first, but only lightly, lest they explode into chaos. The warriors and workers go next. Strength must be maintained. The elders, if respected, are served with quiet reverence. But if they've grown too cranky, or if someone's still mad about a past insult, they might get whatever's left. Tonight, Askell gets lucky, a bit of marrow, scraped from a bone and stirred into his gruel. He lifts the spoon with both hands and eats like it's the best thing he's tasted all winter. Maybe it is. Nearby, a young boy is gnawing noisily on a stale biscuit. He pauses to ask, "Did you eat this when you were my age?" Askell wipes his beard and answers, "No, back then. The biscuits were harder." There's laughter, light, echoing between beams. You breathe it in like warmth. You glance around the room and see the quiet weaving of generations. A mother helping her toddler hold a bowl. A teenager muttering about too much barley again. A gray-haired woman rubbing herbs between her palms to make a salve. And all of them, no matter their age or ache, are bound by food, by the sharing of it, the giving and taking, the chewing and sipping, the laughing and sighing. The dog gets a bone. The goat steals a turnip. The youngest child is asleep mid-bite, drooling gently onto his wooden spoon. You yawn, your jaw cracking slightly. A reminder that your own teeth are still mostly intact this year. You rest your bowl on the floor, tuck your hands into your cloak, and glance one more time at Askell. He's chewing, still, possibly the same piece of jerky, possibly not. And you think, there's something beautifully stubborn about a man who fights winter one bite at a time. The longhouse has entered its favorite hour. Firelight and gossip, not the dramatic kind. No backstabbing lords or scandalous affairs. Just the warm, idle, meandering kind that floats like wood smoke above steaming bowls and half-emptied mugs. You scoot closer to the hearth. The flames flicker low now, glowing orange against the soot-darkened walls. Shadows stretch tall. The children are half asleep, curled against cloaks and soft sheepskins. The older folk are wide awake now as their time. Dinner may be over, but the talking never stops. Someone mentions a neighbor's wife who supposedly made bread using powdered eggshells for calcium. Swears it cures bad dreams. The tale ends. Someone else mutters. Swears it chipped my tooth. Across the room, two cousins argue about who once caught the biggest cod. Both are wrong. Everyone knows it was the goat who stole that fish and dragged it into the pond. There was no meat left. But the story's been growing fatter ever since. The Viking longhouse at night is less a place than a mood. Glow, steam, and voices. You lean against the beam, eyes half closed, listening to the chorus of ordinary lives stitched together by food and memory. The gossip often starts with meals. The stew's better than last week. Only because last week had rat bits. That wasn't rat. Exactly, but it doesn't stop there. It becomes memory, myth, soft boasts, quiet complaints. You hear a tale of a woman who once baked bread so tough it broke her husband's tooth, and she claimed it was an omen from Thor. You hear another of a man who brewed ale so sour it turned green. He drank it anyway, just to prove a point. The point remains unclear. Historians still argue whether Viking oral traditions were primarily entertainment or education. But here, now, it's obvious. They were also comfort. Talking through the night kept the cold at bay and the hunger from echoing too loudly. You shift your feet closer to the fire. The stone beneath them is warm. Above you, a bundle of herbs twists gently in the rising air. A mother plucks a flake of dried onion from her toddler's hair and laughs quietly to herself. An uncle tells a story for the 7th time this week, slightly louder, slightly longer, slightly more exaggerated. No one stops him. The ritual is the point. Someone passes around a bowl of rehydrated dried berries, sour, chewy, tart like forgotten summer. You pop one in your mouth and let it sit. A flash of sweetness, quickly gone. Like sunlight peeking through snow clouds, the talk turns to trade. Salt prices, rumors from distant coasts. A man claims to have seen a ship with spices that smelled like fire and fruit, and something else entirely. Burned my nose. It did, he says proudly. No one believes him, but everyone listens. You yawn, stretch, then sip from a cup of watered-down ale. It tastes like damp bark, but it's warm. And somehow, this fire, this chatter, this faint taste of berry is as much nourishment as anything that came from the stew pot. You let yourself sink into the sounds. Not dramatic, not exciting, but beautifully human. A community wrapped in steam and story. A belly not quite full, but heart gently humming. And outside, just wind, snow, and the frozen sea. But inside, someone just started a story with, "You won't believe what Bjorn tried to pickle last spring." And you're all ears. You wake in the middle of the night not from cold, but from quiet. Deep, blanket-thick quiet. The kind that makes you unsure if time is even moving. The fire has burned low to embers. A few snores rise like soft waves, layered over the creaking of wood and the distant groan of wind. You shift your weight, stretch your back, and ease out of your sleeping spot. Careful not to step on a dog or child or bundle of moss you mistook for a pillow. There's something comforting about Viking silence. It's never total. The longhouse breathes wood, wool, smoke, sleep. You drift toward the food stores, not because you're hungry, exactly, but because night hunger is a thing. And there, half buried in the snow-packed pit, you see it, the salt bag. Viking salt wasn't always mined. It was often traded. Coastal folk sometimes boiled seawater in great iron pots, leaving behind white crystals that clumped like cold sand. Inland, salt came from traders, warriors, or the occasional overly ambitious traveler with brine-stained boots. You take a pinch and taste it. Sharp, pure, suddenly. Your tongue remembers every bland bite you've had since the last pinch. Salt made boring food bearable and good food glorious, which is why it wasn't used lightly. It seasoned feasts. It preserved meat. It healed wounds. It even paid debts. Salt was survival, flavor, medicine, currency. Historians still argue whether Vikings had consistent access to salt or if it was a rare luxury hoarded by chieftains and raiders. There's evidence both ways. But here, in this longhouse, tonight, it feels sacred. You gently reseal the bag and reach for a bundle nearby. Dried herbs and preserved cheese, wrapped in linen and tucked behind a sealed pot. The cheese is hard-aged until crumbly, with sharp edges and a nose that announces itself before you get too close. It's the good kind, though tangy, salty, a little nutty. You cut a sliver and nibble it like it's treasure. Suddenly, a voice behind you. Couldn't sleep. It's the youngest warrior, Eric, barely grown, but already shouldering a sword like a man twice his age. You nod. Offer him a piece of cheese. He breaks it in two. This was traded in the West, he says, chewing slowly. Guy said it came from monks who only made one wheel a year. You raise an eyebrow. Sounds expensive. He grins. It cost 3 goats and a wedding promise. You both laugh softly. Too much noise and someone will wake and want a piece. You sit on a log by the smoldering hearth. He adds a stick of driftwood. It catches slowly. The smoke curls upward, pale and sleepy. You talk about trade, about what it takes to get spice or flour, or that one sour ale with fruit in it that someone insists they tasted in a faraway village. You talk about raids too, but softly, not the killing kind, the raiding for honey kind, the I heard the English have actual butter kind. Trade is risky, but it's how you get stories, and salt, and citrus. Once, no one believes that last one. He finishes his cheese, leans back, and mutters, "We should trade for more of this." You nod, or find monks. Eventually, Eric drifts off mid-sentence, eyes closed, hand still holding the last crumb. You take the linen, wrap the cheese again, and tuck it back into its cool corner. You lie back down, the fire warm on your cheeks, salt still tingling on your lips, and the faintest hint of cheese lingering in the air. In a world of fish and root vegetables, that's as close to luxury as it gets. And outside, the snow keeps falling. Morning drifts into the longhouse like mist, slow, pale, and not entirely welcome. There's no rooster crowing, no sunbeam cutting through a window. just the quiet stirrings of people remembering they're still alive, still cold, and still slightly hungry. Breakfast isn't served, it's reassembled. Bits of yesterday's gruel, the last strip of goat cheese from the night's secret snack, and something new bubbling in the cauldron, a thick paste made from crushed beans and reheated broth. You chew slowly, then decide chewing may not even be necessary. But over by the fire, someone is telling a tale, a saga. Really, but not the kind with battles and sea monsters. No, this one is about a fish so enormous, it fed 20 men and a raven. It's mostly exaggeration, obviously. But with Viking food, sometimes myth and menu blur. Take, for example, the story of the barley cake that stopped a war. Supposedly, two rival families were set to fight over grazing land until someone offered a feast. At the center of the table, a cake layered with dried berries, goat fat, and 3 types of flour. The guests were so impressed by the flavors, they forgot they hated each other. Piece by pastry. Someone chuckles at that. If all we needed was cake, we'd have stopped raiding years ago. Viking mythology didn't just feature gods. It featured food, mead that refilled itself, boars that recooked every night, apples that granted immortality and presumably also fiber. These stories weren't just entertaining, they were aspirational. Historians still argue whether the food in sagas reflected real dishes or just poetic symbolism. Did Vikings really believe in honey rivers and goat udders that poured ale? Or were those the bedtime snacks of the collective imagination? Either way, you can't help but smile when someone stirs the pot and jokingly whispers, "May this stew refill itself," like Hydrun's horn. There's a story about a magical cow whose breath could grow barley. Another about a chieftain who outate a giant using only salt herring and sass. That one's a favorite. You sip your warm drink, a thin ale, more like cereal water, and listen. No one seems to care if the stories are true. They're warm. They're familiar, like stale bread you've come to like. Even the goat gets a mention in a tale, supposedly descended from Thor's chariot-pulling beasts. She's revered in the story, although the real one is currently trying to chew on someone's sleeve. You feed her a crust. She accepts with attitude, and for a moment, in the soft blur between truth and tale, it's easy to imagine that the gods really do watch from above, chuckling into their golden mead as humans scrape stew pots and tell stories to survive the dark. Because that's what this is, survival by story. When food is thin, you pad it with imagination. When winter lingers, you sweeten it with myth. When dinner is just soup again, you season it with a tale about how Odin once forgot to light his hearth and had to eat cold porridge for 3 weeks. You finish your bowl and feel satisfied. Not full, but definitely filled. Not by calories, by company, by memory. By the quiet magic that turns dried turnips and dried out tales into something worth staying awake for, if only just a little longer. By now, winter feels like it's been here forever. The snow no longer surprises you. The dark no longer confuses you. And your stomach has learned to expect exactly what it gets. Strange combinations born of necessity. Tonight's stew, a desperation mix. You watch as someone drops a withered apple, a handful of dried nettles, and what looks suspiciously like the last of the goat butter. There's a collective hush. That butter was supposed to last until spring. Too late now. The pot bubbles. This is what Viking cuisine looks like in late winter. Creativity tinged with mild panic. It's the stage where food storage starts to whisper back at you. The root cellar smells sourer. The onions sprout green tufts. The pickled cabbage has developed an attitude, and yet somehow dinner happens. It always does. Someone adds crumbled barley cakes from last week. Another throws in a chunk of smoked fish so dried it clinks like stone. The stew takes on a beige tone, a bit of sheen, and a smell that's not exactly bad, just unfamiliar. You help stir gently, because at this point the stew is more tradition than nourishment. It's an act of hope. Keep feeding the pot. Keep feeding the people. The ingredients don't matter anymore. The motion does. Historians still argue whether Viking households had a true hungry gap like in other medieval agrarian societies. A stretch of early spring where food stocks ran out before fresh growth returned. The sagas don't say much, but archaeology reveals bones boiled twice, bread made with bark, and cellar pits scraped dry. So yes, There were gaps, and the Vikings crossed them with creativity, grit, and occasionally soup made from things best left vague. You sit with your bowl, now filled with something, a bit of grain, a root shaving, a translucent sliver of dried apple skin. You chew slowly and imagine summer. You think of fresh milk, fish pulled straight from the fjord, green herbs crushed in warm hands, apples, actual apples, not ones that look like old faces. Someone beside you mutters, "Remember cheese." You nod, barely. They nod back. Best not to get used to it anyway. That's the mood. A strange mix of longing and resignation. You dream of feasts, but you don't expect them. You plan gardens in your head. You smell imaginary strawberries in your sleep. You swear you saw a sprout once in the snow, though it turned out to be goat dung shaped, suspiciously like a leaf. Someone says, "We should make cake for the spring thaw." Someone else laughs. With what? The answer is silence. Then laughter. Then, unexpectedly, someone goes to the store pit and returns with dried rose hips. They're shriveled, barely fruit, but sweet enough to lift the mood. A few go into the pot, a few into mouths. Someone says they're for fertility. Someone else says they taste like candle wax. Everyone eats them anyway. You look around. People are thinner, paler, slower, but still moving, still sharing, still stirring the same pot, telling the same jokes, nodding at the same goat who continues to chew on a boot like it holds the secret to summer. And the stew, it's not good, but it's warm, and at the bottom of your bowl, stuck to the side, is a flake of something crispy. You pry it free with your spoon. It's slightly sweet, slightly burnt, possibly the ghost of a forgotten biscuit. You chew slowly. It tastes like endurance. The days are getting just a little longer now. Not enough to notice unless you've spent months in the dark, but enough for hope to sneak back in. The sky at midday has shifted from slate gray to a shade just one step lighter. The air smells subtly different too, less frozen dirt, more damp moss, and inside the longhouse, something remarkable happens. Someone mentions apples out loud. Not dried, not wrinkled, actual, crisp, sun-warmed apples. Everyone goes quiet for a second, as if the word itself might summon them. You close your eyes and try to remember the taste. Sharp, sweet, juice spilling down your chin, your teeth sinking into something alive, not stored, not brined, not guessed at. You sigh involuntarily. So does the person next to you. It's not just apples people dream about. It's fresh anything. Milk still warm from the cow. Trout caught hours, not months ago. Peas so green they don't even seem real. You sit on your bench, slowly tearing apart the last of your barley flatbread. It's stale, dry, and kind of perfect. A reminder that you made it this far, and that better food is coming. Eventually, in the corner, someone strings a line near the smoke vent and begins hanging the first of spring's fishing nets. It's early, yes, but optimism isn't rationed. And then there's the goat. She's still here, still chewing everything that isn't nailed down. She hasn't given milk in weeks, but you suspect she knows her time is nearly up. She's been eyeing the exit lately, perhaps planning a solo voyage to a greener pasture. You scratch behind her ears. Just a few more weeks. You whisper. Historians still argue whether Viking winter fare actually built resilience, or just wore people down to raw nerves and calluses. Probably both. But the point wasn't to enjoy it. The point was to endure it. And you did. The stew is thinner now, the salt gone, the dried meat, all chewed. But you're still here. You're still chewing, still laughing sometimes. You hear a conversation about digging out the seed jar soon. Someone else talks about a trading boat expected by the next full moon. Another whispers of a place where cabbages grow as big as helmets. No one believes it. Everyone wants to. The longhouse smells like ash, wool, and old broth, but also like people who are about to move again, about to open doors, about to taste green things. And tonight's stew, it has a single clove of garlic someone found at the bottom of a crate. You swear it changes everything. You savor it. Slowly, silently. You don't tell anyone. Because sometimes the smallest thing is enough. The fire has sunk low now. Just the soft glow of embers pulsing in the hearth. Around you, the sounds of the longhouse fade into stillness. The voices quiet. The bowls are stacked. The goat finally settles. Even the snoring has taken on a rhythm. steady and low, like the lull of a tide rolling beneath wooden beams. You lie back against your blanket, breath slowing, mind wandering. Maybe you're thinking of apples again, or maybe of summer wind, the kind that bends the grass in long waves, the kind that smells of sun and salt and something sweet you can't quite name. Outside, the snow hasn't stopped, but it doesn't matter anymore. You've eaten, you've listened, you've laughed a little. The stew wasn't perfect. The bread was dry. The cheese fought back, but it was enough. The Viking world wasn't easy. It didn't promise comfort, but it offered ritual, and in those rituals stirring the pot, telling the tale, chewing slowly through the darkness, people made something beautiful. Continuity. You close your eyes. The longhouse breathes around you. Wood creaks. Wind sighs. Someone murmurs in their sleep. And in the stillness, you let yourself drift. Maybe into dreams of full tables, of green hills, of fresh milk poured into carved cups. Or maybe just into the peace of knowing you've made it through another night. That in the quiet, in the company, in the smallest bite you found just enough warmth to carry on. Sleep well, traveler.